anything, but so be it. So next week we've got our retreat starting Thursday, running Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And I just want to say a little bit about it. The theme, so to speak, of the retreat is original love. It's what it's pointing to is not is basically love is an inadequate word actually, but the love that is the origin. It's the origin. It's a way of expressing what we can come to in our Zen practice, in this Buddhist / Taoist / whatever it is way that we have fortunately sort of find ourselves all inheriting, in some sense, coming to this very deep, old, beautiful discovery essentially about human nature that can be made through this practice. And if we go, successively sort of deeper in it, we come to this point where, as you'll have heard, and you'll have heard it on the Taoist side as primordial absence, you'll have heard it on the Buddhist side as emptiness. Actually, in some Hindu reckonings, they call it moksha, extinguishing. Basically coming to this point where there is no thing. As Ruben Habito Roshi put it in a recent talk, no thing. Yeah, sometimes we say simply nothing at all. But to think of that as some proposition about the nature of reality is actually misleading. And to think of it as really being a void is even more misleading. In a sense, to think of it at all is misleading, because what these words are really trying to connote, denote, label is an experience, is a human experience of this very moment. A sort of a dimension, and it's not a dimension, it's sort of a non-dimension, pre all dimensions, before all dimensions, that is here now. And one label for this that might be, I'm going to be exploring whether it's a good one in this retreat and see whether you agree. But one label for it is original love. Love that is the origin, is the originating force, something like that. And it's absolutely all pervasive. But the only way to find how all pervasive it is, it seems to me, or to really thoroughly find that, is to go to this utter falling away of everything, self and world, and that's really what our Mu practice is actually. I was going to say pushing us toward, but drawing us, leading us, inviting us towards. When we sit with Mu, and I think a fair number of you are, and I'm going to be talking about Mu quite a bit, I think, on this retreat. I want to really, put some fuel in the tank for those of you who are sitting with Mu. It's a very, it's a very odd and can be slightly forbidding practice, but I really want to try to convey the beauty of it the best I can. Now, the whole point of this really is, as we know from the Buddhist side, the very first teaching, the sort of first teaching, the first element in the first teaching, the first noble truth is suffering. There is suffering. There is suffering. And it's the first truth, it's the first teaching, because it's the thing that, in a sense, we must begin. We must begin there. And you might think, well, I don't need to, thank you very much, when it comes, it comes. But actually, it comes more often than we recognize. There's some baseline rumble of disquiet for many of us that we spend a lot of energy ignoring, distracting ourselves from. And this practice begins by saying, no, let's look at that. Let's experience that. Let's not push it away. Let's not try to sweep it under the rug until a later date. And it gives us a means and a method for being able to, so to speak, face it, to be with it, and to examine it, to come to know it better, to do the opposite of what we instinctively want to do, which is to get rid of it or to turn away from it. The practice says, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to go towards it. We're going to lean into it, because that's how we are going to take the first step. It's actually not a step, it's a sinking. We're going to take the first drop on the beautiful sinking below the surface, in a sense. Of course, this is just a metaphor, an analogy, but like being an old piece of flotsam on a pond or on an ocean, it sits there and it starts to get waterlogged as we're practicing, sitting still. We start to get waterlogged and we start to sink a little bit. And at first we think, I don't want to do that. I'm just going, more pain, going into pain. But actually it's beautiful because we don't know it, but we're gradually getting more and more waterlogged by this original love as we go deeper, deeper, deeper in our practice, just sitting. It's such a simple, beautiful thing it asks us to do, just to sit. And I've talked, probably ad nauseam about these sort of levels of practice, and it's very important. This first level is just learning how to have a welcoming, loving awareness. This really commonly called mindfulness practice. Developing sati, present moment awareness that doesn't judge, that welcomes. Developing that, and how really, I think you could also call it loving awareness, quite reasonably. It's discovering that we come with a built-in capacity. It just takes, again, it's like a built-in capacity to embrace suffering. And that's but the way that happens, again, it's not by turning away from it, it's by sitting with it. And I'm afraid, I don't think anybody's exempt from the need for this. It seems that, the only way to avoid suffering is not to be born, because to live is basically to come into this experience where we will lose things. We will, all the things that we might want to get are all very liable to be lost, and in the end must be lost. Whether it's, people we love, or whether it's other things that we particularly want and desire, status and wealth or comfort and, nice watch, nice car, nice house, whatever it might be, all the things that we think we want. We are, we sort of cannot but lose. So loss is a necessary feature of our life. And as I'm going to read you a lovely little poem that I think is Secho, actually, but I can't confirm that right now. Or maybe it quotes Secho, Shuedo, the guy who compiled the Blue Cliff Record. Coming empty-handed, going empty-handed. That is human. When you are born, where do you come from? When you die, where do you go? Life is like a floating cloud appearing. Death is like a floating cloud disappearing. The floating cloud itself originally does not exist. Life and death, coming and going, are also like that. But there is one thing which always remains clear. It is pure and clear, not depending on life and death. What is the one pure and clear thing? What is the one pure and clear thing? We might say right away, well, it's probably not really a thing. This Dharma we sometimes speak of, it has different faces, many different faces, many different faces. But in the end, only one face, which is not a face. Our practice is propelled by the suffering that comes from not knowing, not seeing that. And it propels us back towards it. So suffering is actually a great gift, though it often doesn't feel like it. I suppose when it feels like it, it's no longer suffering. But we get lulled into feeling sort of secure in the wrong kind of way, and we forget that each of us is just one phone call away from grievous loss. One phone call away, always. In Mumon's commentary on the Koan Mu, he says, even once you've really awakened in this practice, even if you're on the brink of life and death, by which he really means even if you're about to die, you live in the samadhi of innocent play. And that's a beautiful description of profound awakening, where really life and death no longer strike us at all the way they habitually have done, not at all. We really found this one pure and clear thing. It's so beautiful to find it, and there is total innocence and play, total freedom. But the truth is actually that we're always living on the brink of life and death. This Dharma, when we find it, is on the brink of life and death. It's like we naturally want to lead sort of, lives of some sort of security and comfort. Of course we want that, but actually we can't really have that. We can't really have the certainty we really want in this life, if that makes sense. I want to just read a little quote from Buddha's search, or how a take on his awakening. And this is supposedly while he was sitting under the Bodhi tree, and enlightenment, just before enlightenment struck, or around the time it struck. Surely, if living creatures saw the results of all their evil deeds, they would turn away from them in disgust. But selfhood blinds them, and they cling to their obnoxious desires. I'm not quite sure which sutra this is from. They crave pleasure for themselves, and they cause pain to others. When death destroys their individuality, they find no peace. Their thirst for existence abides, and their selfhood reappears in new births. Thus they continue to move in the coil and can find no escape from the hell of their own making. And how empty are their pleasures, how vain are their endeavors. Hollow like the plantain tree, and without contents like the bubble. The world is full of evil and sorrow because it is full of desire. The best way to end the evil and sorrow of the world is therefore to overcome desire. On realizing this, Siddhartha became Buddha, the enlightened one. But you see how, it's because there's many versions of Buddha's awakening in different sutras and different traditions. And actually, I'm not 100% familiar with this particular one, but versions of it, similar things I've read. But the point being, all the things that, just because of this sense of self, we're desperate to find ways to assuage the constant ache of insufficiency, constant rising of desires, driving us, never satisfied, or only maybe briefly satisfied. Hedonic adaptation, I think they call it. That we get something we want, at most it'll give us a boost for 6 weeks, and then we're back to wanting, the insatiability. And unless we can somehow break through that, it's just going to go on, and we'll go to any lengths. And it doesn't matter, in the end, who we hurt in the process. Now, I wanted to, and the way out of this is, from this Buddhist perspective, is a practice that can take us sort of back down the radius towards the hub, and so sort of what has pushed us, the desire and the dissatisfaction pushing us, we go back, pushing us away from the center, we go back down that towards the center, towards the hub. That's where exactly really the way we don't think we want to go. That's why we're sitting still and kind of annulling, what's the word? Mortifying. No, not quite. So just going against the impulse by being still. The impulse to seek what we think we want, to seek to avoid what we think we don't want. We just sit still, and that gradually brings us back to the center, where we don't think we want to go. But actually, that's where we, amazingly, when we do go, that's where we find something boundless, pure, clear, so beyond beauty, so beautiful it's beyond beauty. Personally, I think that all things that we find beautiful, that beauty is an echo of this real, ultimate sort of beauty. But it's also in some kind of way, it seems to be sort of the origin point of every moment. Every moment, it's here, always, and every moment is its expression. Hence, original love is making every moment. Of course, us too. We're part of. We're inseparable from this moment. It's making us and this moment. And what is it that's making it? You can't find it. Nothing. You can't find it. Nothing there. But here it is, arising as this. Hence, original love. But what we'll look at in the retreat is sort of various sort of refractions of that love, sort of on the way down, so to speak. So it's not like got to be major sort of a taste of it. You taste it in many, many ways, all the way down. So beautiful. Now, okay, so that's sort of a briefest of little sort of glimpse of how I hope next week will be. Actually, I'm really sort of a little bit excited about it, actually, myself, and how we'll be doing it. But I want to turn to one more most important matter to close tonight, and maybe I should have opened with this, but whatever suffering we may need to deal with personally, not overlooking that, but we're in a very remarkable moment right now in this country. I'm sure you may agree with me or you may not, but it seems to me that there's little doubt that a very long overdue national moral awakening is going on. And whether it's, how these things come about, when they come about, who knows? But it seems to be, it relates to this strange period of stopping, this pause, not for everybody, but for many, in the normal run of things. Suddenly, much less social interaction, much less travel, much more staying at home, much more being still, and no doubt for some more practice, probably for others more beers. I don't know, but the fact is, there's been this extraordinary hiatus, gap, pause in the endless sort of hive-like activity of modern life. I don't know what the percentage is. 5% of planes flying, maybe 5% of traffic, just strange stillness. It's almost, a little bit analogous to the stillness of one person sitting, and how that sitting is the way to clarify things, to see things, to see the workings of greed or desire, of ill will, and of ignorance or delusion or misunderstanding, to see them more clearly so we can become a bit wiser to them. Maybe in some collective way that's been happening on a collective level through this greater stillness. And it's simply unavoidable now. Everybody's seeing it. It's not just the police. The police are, of course, a symptom, but the idea that we've just got to reform the police, that's not it. It's something much more widespread. This, a deep, abiding racist bias that has somehow, because the Civil War happened, and slavery was abolished or something. Somehow, maybe we've all thought it was over, or maybe some of us are more switched on about this and some are less switched on about this. I'm going to read you a little bit about moral awakenings that in this book, Aha, I've read from it, I think recently, The Moments of Insight That Shape Our World. It's by this philosopher in, I think it's Ohio, called William Irvin. And he's talking here about a guy called Clarkson in 18th century England. So I'm just going to read you a bit. In the 1780s, slavery was illegal in England, but British citizens were free to engage in the slave trade. And because slave trading was so profitable, it played an important role in the British economy. Against this social backdrop, Thomas Clarkson experienced a moral aha moment. He was at the time a student at Cambridge University, preparing himself for a career in the church. In 1784, he entered an essay contest and he won it. He responded to this victory by setting for himself the goal of becoming the first Cambridge student to win 2 essay prizes. It was at this point that his life took the detour he later described in his history of the rise, progress, and accomplishment of the abolition of the African slave trade by the British Parliament. The second essay competition Clarkson entered had been devised by a Cambridge professor. Essay writers were to answer the question, is it right to make slaves of others against their will? Clarkson decided that a good essay writing strategy would be to focus his attention on the African slave trade. In the course of doing his research, Clarkson came across Anthony Benezet's historical account of Guinea, which described the slave trade in horrific detail. Clarkson had not realized the extent to which slaves suffered. Reading this book lifted a veil from his eyes and greatly distressed him. He later described this period of his life in the following terms. In the daytime, I was uneasy. In the night, I had little rest. I sometimes never closed my eyelids for grief. His essay writing project, he said, became now, this is quote, not so much a trial for academic reputation as for the production of a work which might be useful to injured Africa. This in turn caused him to redouble his effort in writing the essay. I always slept with a candle in my room that I might rise out of bed and put down such thoughts as might occur to me in the night if I judged them valuable, conceiving that no arguments of any moment should be lost in so great a cause. The effort he put into his essay must have been apparent to the judges. They awarded it first place. Prize winners of such contests were expected to read their essays in public. In June of 1785, Clarkson traveled to London to do so. As he rode along, he tried to convince himself that the contents of his essay were not true, but to no avail. If they were true, though, slavery was clearly a moral abomination. And yet the people around him, even those who were educated and church-going, not only tolerated slavery, but even sometimes took steps to profit from it by buying shares in slave ships. How could this be? Near Wade's Mill in Hertfordshire, he dismounted from his horse and sat down to think. He concluded that it was morally imperative that slavery be abolished. Months after this epiphany, Clarkson remained in a state of moral turmoil. I walked frequently into the woods that I might think on the subject in solitude and find relief to my mind there. But the question still occurred, are these things true? Still the answer followed as instantaneously, they are. In the summer of 1786, these thoughts culminated in a second epiphany, that he should dedicate his life to bringing the slave trade to an end. My compassion for their sufferings were at that moment so great, so immense, so overwhelming as to have overpowered me and compelled me to form the resolution which I dared not resist. It was at my peril to resist, of attempting their deliverance. Thus I was forced into the great work. I have often indulged in the belief that this feeling might have come from God. Experiencing two aha moments, the way Clarkson did, is not unusual in the moral domain. In the first aha, a person realizes that something is morally wrong. In the second, they realize that they have a duty to right that wrong. The first aha moment can transform the person who has it, but unless they go on to have a second aha moment, the world likely will be unaffected by their original epiphany. Most of the people I examine in what follows have experienced the second aha moment. Otherwise, it is unlikely that I would know of their existence. Okay, so you hear he's describing, and he goes on to talk about Gandhi, and it's a great little book, this actually, Aha, simply called Aha. I was hoping, when I got it, that it would touch, of course, on Zen style, major aha, Kensho, but it doesn't actually go there. But nevertheless, it's a very valuable book. So you see what he's talking about. That one thing is to realize, just to realize that there's a whole, people's suffering in a way that we had not realized. Some people actually, he talks about people, throughout history, this has happened, but that's one thing. But then the other thing is, how does that switch into, I must somehow help? How does that come home to us? We at Mountain Cloud are initiating among our leadership steps to try to, really bring this home to us as an organization that professes to be working to awaken, liberate, and protect all beings. And I would sort of see it these days as this, in terms of these sort of, forgive me, but what I'm calling levels of original love, that we can't really even use language like that if we're not cognizant of how we may be participating, in unconscious bias, in privilege that we don't recognize, by not knowing even how other people are suffering who are not of our demographic. I used to feel as a kid, when I was in my teens, actually, in England, I was a half Jewish guy, and you may not believe this, but in England in the 1970s, there was, you could pick up clear anti-Semitism. It wasn't, it was very unpleasant to realize that. It was very, very hurtful to discover that people I thought were friends would joke about, Henry being Jewish, and not very nice ways, stereotypes. And there's kind of really, really, and there's nothing you can do about it. If there's simply nothing you can do about it. It's very, but I mean, that's just so trivial compared to Valerie, who's given talks here. She's dean of, had been dean, and she just retired from being dean of a college in Dallas, and many times she's had students of color come to her they're just terrified of getting in the car and driving home. You know, they could get stopped by a cop who says they've got a tail light out. They may not have a tail light out, and they might not survive the encounter. That kind of oppression, the threat of that kind of violence from, you know, the so-called public safety aides. You know, it's, you know, we're living in a country that is doing that to people. I wish I, you know, I wish I could, I hope I'll be learning more about ways we might help, you know. So far I know that, you know, one has to be really, to be an ally is a first step, but one has to be very sort of careful about allyship, as they call it, you know, not you know, approach it with great humility. But anyway, we are, you know, we are, you know, this discovery that I'm talking about at the start of this talk, I want to say this, that it actually is intrinsically ethical. It's intrinsically moral, because it includes all. And that's marvelous and wondrous, and not to be in any way sort of diminished. It's, you know, it's a terribly important thing that there are people who are devoting themselves to keeping this clear and to finding it, you know, finding it more. But, you know, it has implications, and how we respond on that level, what kind of help we are called to offer, you know, that is very important. I mean, that is everything as well. How do we express what we discover? How do we live the implications of what we discover? So, you know, I want us, please, you know, please let's all be becoming more and more cognizant of this. Let's not be, I'm sorry, I can see that I'm a little bit, can you see me okay? I mean, not that it really matters, but I can see this sort of dazzling kind of, I've just got a little tiny image of me, but it's more than I want. But I can see a sort of blinding light behind my head, which is unnerving me. Anyway, I'm sort of winding to the end of this talk. But so look, let's keep sitting, don't let up, don't let up. This is very deep work. It's the deepest work, and let's open our hearts to how we express what we find in our sitting in this world in more and more helpful ways, bringing about the just society that we must have, we all want. Please, let's all do our best, and I hope we'll be, Mountain Cloud will be offering more ways, you know, to look at this and act in this kind of way. Anyway, that's too much from Henry. So please, deep thanks to all of you for your practice and for tolerating patiently my ramblings, and thank you. And I really hope we'll have a good time next week. We'll have Q&A every day, by the way. So maybe that'll be an opportunity to hear from others, some interesting thoughts on this. Mu, love, Dharma, and social well-being, you know, reform, well-being.